Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to continue my series on adapting the board game Source of the Nile. In the last video, we looked at hunting and how you can gain rations by doing that. And in this video, we're going to look at what happens if you don't have enough rations in your or to feed everyone in your expedition. So I've set up an expedition that is sort of designed to run out of food. So I've got 3 specialists, the player character, 1 scout, 1 guard, and 9 bearers, which means that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people that can hunt and 10 people that can't, and we're taking no rations with us. So we're going to set out into the desert, which is one of the sort of worst terrains for hunting, and we'll see what happens. We might not get to hunt straight away because we might run into natives, but if that happens, we'll just backspace using this button and start again. So we'll set out at a normal pace, and as predicted, we did come across a group of natives, so we'll just try again. Okay, so this is what happens. So you'll see that I got rid of the testing only text, which was to do with it told you every mile how far you'd gone and how many movement points you had, because that seemed to be working fine. But I've kept other testing text, which I won't get rid of until we've sort of finished the whole game and we can sort of properly test it by playing a complete game. Anyway, as you can see, we rolled a 2, meaning the hunt is unsuccessful. And then it says testing only, the chance of sickness or desertion is 15 out of 15. So what does that mean? Well, the consequences of not having enough food are that you, the player character, and any specialists that you're bringing, so the botanist, doctor, and anthropologist, etc., can get sick, and the guards, bearers, and scout desert. They run away, sort of thing, or they leave the expedition during the night or something. We'll see what getting sick means in the next video. That's the next bit we're going to code. But the way that it works is, in this case, it says the chance of sickness or desertion is 15 out of 15. And it applies that chance to every person in the expedition, one by one. And this is an example of how we can be much more complex and have a lot more rolling than we could have in a board game, because a computer can do, really any number of calculations very, very quickly. We don't have to make the player continually roll dice. So we can have rolls for 15 different characters, which would be quite tedious if it were done in a board game, but it's actually quite easy in a computer game because it just does it for us. In this case, the chance of sickness or desertion is 15 out of 15. It can be less than 100% because you might have some food, and I'll show you the way that it works when we get to the code. But because the chance is 100%, well, naturally everyone is affected. So it says you fall ill for lack of food, the botanist falls ill, the doctor falls ill, the anthropologist falls ill, your scout deserts, a guard deserts, and all your bearers desert. If we had other than 100% chance, we might have less of a disaster. Some of us might not fall ill, and it might say, 4 bearers desert, or 3, or whatever. So let's have a look at the code that allows this to happen. So it basically all takes place in this new. Well, this isn't new. I had this page set up last time, but it didn't really have any code in it. So it mostly takes place here, but there is one new variable that we need to talk about, and that is the S array. S, of course, standing for sick, and S0 is whether the player character is sick, and then S1 to, I think, 7 is whether particular specialists are sick, and it corresponds to this array here, the C array. So if if S1 is set to 1, then that means the botanist is sick. S2 means the doctor, S3 the anthropologist, and so on. And of course, only the ones that you've chosen to bring with you can fall sick. If it is either 0 or undefined, that means they're fine. If it's set to 1, they're sick. And if it's set to 2, they are improving, which is a status that you can get once you become sick. And we'll see how that works in the next video. But for now, we're only dealing with 0 or 1, not sick or sick. And this only applies to the specialists, the bearers and guards and the scout, because they are locals, because they have a home that they can sort of walk home to, I suppose. They don't stick around to get sick. They just run away. So let's have a look at the code that lets this happen. So I'll just zoom in. Oh, hang on, doesn't seem to want to zoom in. Ah, there we go. Okay. All right. So we've got this note to ourselves that Z is the number of rations gained by hunting, and that is carried over from the hunting screen, of course, or the hunting page. I keep calling them screens, but actually page is the real name. But yeah, sorry if I say screen, I'm just getting it wrong, and I meant to say page. So Z is the number of rations that we've got by hunting, and there's another note to ourselves that we can't keep these rations. We can only eat them straight away, because the idea is that they are fresh game and we don't have any method of salting or preserving them or drying them, and so therefore we eat what we can and then we throw away anything else. So the first thing we need to do is we find out the number of people, and we set y equal to 1 plus p0 plus ex4 plus ex5 plus ex6. So 1 is for the U character, the player character. P0 is how many specialists you've brought with you. And EX4, 5 or 6 is the people that you've hired on your expedition, the scouts, guards and bearers respectively. And so that's how many people you have to feed. And then we look at a series of possibilities. The first possibility, if Z is greater than or equal to Y, well, that's the best possibility. That means we've hunted enough to feed the expedition. We don't have to dig into our rations that we brought with us. We can just have the fresh game. So in that case, nothing happens. There's just a little note to anyone who might be looking to explain what the code means. If we got to keep the rations, I've made a little note here of the code that we would use to do that, which is we would set EX9, the number of rations, to be equal to EX9 plus Z minus Y. So plus the number of rations that we hunted, minus the number of people that we have, because each person eats one ration, and then if there's anything left over, we add it to EX9. I don't know if I've talked about this before, this overall equals. What that means is just if Z is over Y, then execute this code, but also if Z is equal to Y, then execute this code. So you can have greater than or equal to, you can also have, sorry, I just pressed the wrong key there. You can also have less than or equal to, which means what you'd think from the name. If it's less than, execute the code, but also if it's equal to, execute the code. And then we would need to, having added to our rations, we would need to go to this page, classify expedition. Now, why would we need to go to that page? Well, because there's a possibility that having extra rations, they have to be carried. And so if we're like on the very edge of what we can carry, tip us over, and therefore it might change the whether we've got enough bearers and whether we've got enough horses to carry everything and so on. So we have to check that. There isn't anything in Classify Expedition yet. That's one I will be doing in a future video. It will be very similar to the code that we used at the beginning. If you've been following this series, you'll remember that at the beginning we have to, when we're setting up the expedition, we check each time we make a change. We check to see whether the expedition is viable, and if so, if it's a canoe expedition, will it have movement penalties, and whether it can go by horse or by canoe or by foot. It'll be very, very similar to that code, and in fact, we'll probably move the code that is in here to that new page, so we don't have sort of duplicated code. But for now, there's nothing there. So that's the ideal case, which is that z is greater than or equal to y. If that's not the case, well then z plus ex9 might be greater than or equal to y. In other words, we might have enough food for everyone once we dig into our rations, which is ex9. If that's the case, then it's actually the same code as in this note here. We set ex9 equals ex9 plus z minus y. In this case, that'll be a negative because y, the number of people, will be less than z, the amount of rations. Because if that wasn't the case, we wouldn't have asked whether this code can execute, because this code would have executed. So this else if, we only look at that if this if is false. So we know that this will reduce the load that we have. And again, we have to go to Classify Expedition. Why? Because this case, it might help us. We might be leading. It's unlikely, but of course you've got to check every time. We might have an expedition where we have animals, but we're on foot, but we can't quite get everyone mounted and therefore moving faster, and consuming these rations might be just enough to tip us over the edge. And if that's the case, we need to know about it straight away so that we can give the expedition that benefit. But if neither of those things are the case, then that means the food that we hunted plus the rations that we already have aren't enough to feed the expedition. So what do we do? Well, we set z equals z plus ex9. In other words, if we have any rations, we add them to the rations that we hunted, and then we set ex9 to 0 because we know that we've run out of food. If we're here, we know that this is true. The food that we hunted plus the rations that we carry, if any, aren't enough to feed the expedition. So we know that this is going to be 0. And then we have to test every person in the expedition to see whether they get sick if they're a specialist or the player character, or desert if they're one of the people that we hire at the start. So, and it has this sort of note to ourselves: the chance of sickness or desertion is y minus z out of y. So why is it y minus z out of y? Well, because that's a way of measuring what proportion of people, or what proportion of food we had. Like, do we have no food, or do we have sort of almost enough food? Do we have like 9/10 of the food that we need, or do we have 2/3 of the food that we need, or do we have a quarter of the food that we need? And I've decided that that proportion is the chance that any given person will suffer some consequence for it. So y minus z, people minus the rations that we have, that's how far short we are. So let's say we have 15 people and 14 rations. Well, we're 1 short. because, well, we're one short in real life because you have 14, well, in the fiction of the game anyway, not in real life. We have 14 rations and 15 people, so that's the same as being one short. One short out of 15. The idea, I guess, is that you would share what you have in the fiction of the game. Presumably you share what you have, and then the closer that is to a full meal, the closer that is to people will sort of stick around for one more day or be healthy for one more day. So let's say we had 14 rations and 15 people. The chance of getting sick would be 15 minus 14, which is to say 1 out of 15, so very low. But let's say instead we had 15 people and only 2 rations, well then our chance of sickness or desertion would be 13 out of 15. That would be very high. In other words, the closer we are to having enough food, the less the chance of anyone being affected. So, the first thing we do is we check the first thing the computer does, I guess, or the game, is that it checks the specialist. So for x equals 0, x is under or equal to c dot length minus 1. C is the array that has the names like doctor, botanist, missionary, and so on. So if Sx does not equal 1, so we look at the S array, which is the array to see if people are sick. You can't get sick if you're already sick. There's no, it's a fairly crude system, I suppose. You're either not sick or sick. There's no sicker. In real life, of course, starving for several days in a row would make you sicker, but at the moment I'm just being as close as possible to as close to the rules as written as I can, except that this is a new thing. In the game, it seems like you choose who gets to eat, and then everyone who doesn't gets sick or deserts, and so you have a sort of choice as to who to keep. But in this case, I've decided it's random. So if the particular specialist we're looking at isn't sick, or in the case of 0, that refers to the U character, and either x equals 0, which means we're talking about the player character, or px equals 1. So the reason for that is if px does not equal 1, we haven't brought one of those specialists with us. So if we don't have a missionary, obviously the missionary can't get sick. But we always have a U character, we always have a player character. So it's if x equals 0, or if x is equal to 0, which is that double equal sign, or px is equal to 1. In other words, if the particular person we're talking about is actually in the expedition. So if they're in the expedition, if they're not actually sick, and if random 1 to y is less than or equal to y minus z. So as an example, let's say we have 15 people, so y is 15, and we only had 5 rations, so z is 5. That would be if random 1 to 15 is less than or equal to 10. In other words, we have a 10 out of 15 chance of becoming sick, a 2/3 chance of becoming sick. If that is the case, we execute all this code. If it's not the case, then that particular person was healthy or just lucky or whatever, and they're fine, and we move on to the next person. But if that happens, we set Sx equal to 1 to indicate that they're sick. And if we're talking about the U character, we say you fall ill from lack of food. And if it's anyone else, we print Cx and say that they fall ill from lack of food. So we say botanist falls ill from lack of food, or doctor falls ill from lack of food, or whatever. And then we have a /4. So we just do that for every person who is present, who is in this section, who's either a specialist or the U character. Then we're going to deal with the guards, the bearers, and the scout. So we have for W equals 4, W is under or equal to 6, and W plus plus. So why is it 4 to 6? It's 4 to 6 because in the EX slot, which keeps track of the stats of the expedition, slots 4 to 6 are the number of scouts, or whether you can only have one scout, but it's the number of scouts, the number of guards, and the number of bearers. So they're the people that we need to look at. So for each of those categories, we set Z2 equal to 0. That number is going to be the number that dessert out of that category. We set x2 equal to ENW, and then we have this full stop to lowercase. So it's $EN square bracket $W N square bracket full stop TO capital L OWER capital C ASE bracket end bracket. So what does to lowercase mean? Well, what to lowercase means is when you have a string, so .z, or as in this case, .enw, or it can be a formula like it could be x plus ing, or whatever. When you have a string and then you put dot to lowercase bracket end bracket, that means take the string but make it all lowercase. So if the string was Washington with a capital W, then the result would be like that, Washington without a capital. Or if it was, let's say, Africa, all in capitals, then the result would be Africa, all in lowercase. And the reason we want that is because we don't want to say, in the array, the specialists are all capitalized, so missionary has a capital M. We don't want to say the missionary with a capital M gets sick, because missionary is not really a title, or it's not a word that we would normally capitalize. So therefore we say the missionary lowercase gets sick. The reason we have it in a capital letter, as a capital letter in the array, you might think, well, if we're doing this, why don't we just have them in lowercase, and we don't need to do that. Well, it's because in the table where we're choosing people, it's treated more like a heading, and headings have capital letters. So that's why we did it. That's why we do it that way. So we have x2, which is the text that we're going to use if we need to, and we have z2, which is the number. Sorry, I didn't give a very good example there because I said missionary with a capital M, but actually we're dealing with scouts, guards, and bearers. So, but what I said was correct, but I didn't give a very good example. When you're choosing them, bearer is treated more like a sort of heading, or and so it seemed to me that it made more sense to have it with a capital letter. But if we're going to say 3 bearers dessert or a bearer desserts, the bearer isn't a sort of title as such, and so it wouldn't have a capital B. All right, so we have this text and we have the number of people who are going to desert, if any. We have y2, which is a for loop. For y2 equals 1, y2 is less than or equal to exw, y2 plus plus. So in other words, do this as often as there are people in this particular category. So roll for each person, basically. If random 1 to y is less than or equal to y minus z, so exactly the same chances as we have over here, and what we've told the player will be happening up here. If random 1 to y is less than or equal to y minus z, then set z2 plus plus. So for each person, have a roll. For everyone that sort of fails the roll, increment z2. Then, well, having done that, having gone through all of them, we set exw equals exw minus z2. In other words, minus however many people are deserting. And then we give a message, and this is the only point to having that x2. If z2 equals 1 and w equals 4, then that means that we're dealing with scouts, because that's ex4. And instead of saying 1 scout deserts, because there can only ever be 1 scout, we say your scout deserts. Else, if z2 is equal to 1, we say bearer deserts, or guard deserts. We never say scout deserts, because this can never trigger without this one triggering. So if it is a scout, then this one would trigger. So we wouldn't ask about this one. So we say your scout deserts, but then we say bearer deserts or guard deserts. Else, if exw is equal to 0, in other words, if everyone has deserted, we print all your guards desert or all your bearers desert. And I've just noticed an error, by the way, in the logic of what I'm doing. I'll finish this and I'll tell you what the error is. I'll give you a clue. It's in this one. So if it's 0, in other words, everyone's deserted, we say all your guards desert or whatever. Otherwise, if Z2 is over 0, if none of these are true, but we have had at least one person desert, we print the number and then the category. So we say 3 guards desert or 4 bearers desert or whatever it might be. Okay, so what's the error? Well, the error is, I've just noticed as I do this, I'll fix it in the version that is uploaded that you can download. But I have just noticed an error, which is, what if EXW equals 0, but it equaled 0 before? What if you have no guards, which would usually be the result of some disaster, because you normally wouldn't set out without any. But what if you have no guards, and then of course none of them will desert because you won't check any of them? Well, this would say all your guards desert, which doesn't make any sense because you didn't have any. So what the code actually should be is if EXW equals 0 and Z2 is over 0. So I'll make it that in the version that you get. So I'm sorry about that. I just noticed that as I was doing it. But anyway, so if EXW equals 0 and at least one person has actually deserted, in other words, we had some before, it says all your guards desert. Otherwise, if none of those are true but Z2 is over 0, then we say whatever it may be, 3 guards desert or 4 bearers desert or 2 guards or whatever. And then we just continue the for loop. So having done that for one category, we then do it for the next. And then when we've done that, of course, we have to go to classify expedition because for the same reason as before, now we've got fewer guards. Well, that might make our expedition quicker. But also, if we've got fewer bearers, that might make the expedition slower. It might be a good result or a bad result in that sense, and we have to check that out. So that is how we deal with lack of food. So I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.